The heterosexual and maternal son overtones of the quilt could have, in addition to reascribing traditional notions of femininity, problematically limited radical queer representations that challenged family life as the center of individuality and critiqued compulsory heterosexuality. The limitations of the quilt I've discussed can best be understood when we consider Jones's claim that the quilt was not political. Jones's attempt at making the quilt apolitical relied on not invoking certain left politics that he personally supported. But in choosing to not voice this politics, or radical politics, Jones was acquiescing to a more mainstream politics. To ensure this, the Names Project members did not, according to Jones, use the rhetoric of gay liberation movement or the left or the New Age. He said, "We don't allow ourselves to be defined in a way that will exclude anyone." He said he wanted to make a movement that would welcome people, men and women, gay or straight, of every age, race, faith, and background. However, Jones's effort at making the quilt ostensibly apolitical was political and did exclude certain politics. While the individual panels had no limits, the official and collective discourses of the quilt did not contain the politics of radical feminism, Marxism, or race radicalism, for example. It would be impossible for the discourse of the quilt to include all politics. Some had to be excluded. And for very political reasons, Jones chose to focus on a politics that was non-threatening to mainstream America. I hope that I've shown that this politics only partially challenged homophobia and did not critically challenge the racism, sexism, and class inequalities that allowed for the spread of HIV/AIDS. More broadly, I hope my analysis has shown how Cleve Jones and the Names Project AIDS quilt grappled with some of the central tensions and questions gay men wrestled with during the first decade of the AIDS epidemic in the US, including the tension between demonstrating the impact of AIDS on gay men and the danger of reifying AIDS as a gay disease, as well as the challenges of responding to the multiple axes of oppression that contributed to the spread of HIV/AIDS.
Hello, and welcome to the presentation, Queer Subjectivities, Pride Toronto, and the Processes of Othering, Finding a Space for Recognition. My name is Cameron Griezmann, and I'm a graduate from the University of Toronto's Women and Gender Studies and Sexuality and Diversity Studies Master's Program. I'm currently working at Prisoners with HIV/AIDS Support Action Network, a social service organization that deals directly with prisoners in Canada who have HIV, either outside or inside the prison system. Today, I'll be talking about the normalization of queerness in Canada and examine the homonormative discourses that orient queer subjectivities within and outside of Pride Toronto. I'm particularly interested in how Pride Toronto, as a not-for-profit organization, parade, and events police particular forms of queerness. In examining the racisms that happen within Pride Toronto, I'd like to focus on this agenda. First, I'm going to focus on Pride Toronto and its adoption of the LGBTQIAQ2S. Secondly, I'll focus on the two research questions. Then I'll focus on terminology. Then I'm going to focus on two-spiritedness in a Canadian context. I'm then going to focus on Fraser's politics of recognition, and then we'll go into depth about recognition and how the tropes of recognition travel within Pride Toronto. And then we'll talk about these tropes in forms of tokenism, racism, and inclusion. Finally, I will conclude, and then I will be available on Skype to answer any questions. In 2009, Pride Toronto adopted the slogan, "Can't stop, won't stop," stating, "No matter what you throw at us, we as a community will never quit being proud." Pride Toronto becomes an important site of analysis to examine queer politics in Canada, as it's localized in a large metropolitan city and welcomes its participants as both queer people and consumers. Pride Toronto has both international and domestic influence on the construction of queer subjectivities. Pride sees itself as a space that disrupts everyday understandings of heteronormativity and heterosexuality, with overt, highly sexual, very political statements of sexual difference that bring awareness to queer diversity in Toronto and more broadly Canada. Pride Toronto names itself as a diverse and inclusive organization that represents all of the LGBTQI2S, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, transsexual, intersex, queer, questioning, and two-spirited peoples. The historical significance of why Pride Toronto formed in the first place becomes lost in the multiple coming-out narratives that are pushed to depoliticize the queer, LGBTQI2S movement. Simultaneously, the LGBTQI2S identities within white-centered queer discourses are simplistically rendered queer, collapsing identity groups and their differences onto one another. As Pride Toronto continues to include all of the identity categories under the umbrella of queer, the formations also act as tropes of acceptance and inclusion. This presentation will address two questions. On the ground, in material terms, what are the practices of exclusion upheld by Pride Toronto? And two, how do the tropes of recognition play out during the Pride Parade? The cohesive solidarity of the queer movement in Canada needs to be interrogated as it upholds and reifies a normalized queer subjectivity that does not rely on difference, but instead similarities. The theoretical backdrop of this project is grounded in Poir's understanding of homonormativity. Homonormativity is the normalization of homosexuality within the neoliberal privatization of affect, its pandering for state and market recognition, its limited focus on rights, and its focus on same but different norms and practices. Homonormative bodies are associated with fitting into a particular neoliberal framework that privileges autonomy, where those who are desired and who become desirable can continue to operate in a realm of gay consumerism, depoliticized by its virtue of operating within capitalism. Homonormative histories and discourses permeate queer politics within Canada. Non-homonormative subjects who do not fit to the realm of white-centered queer politics are othered. Processes of othering are theorized by Said as powerful border-making processes that imagine the world's populations and territories as divided between the West and the other, the Orient. Therefore, the other is utilized within white-settler discourses to permeate Pride Toronto and how it functions, stabilizing both homonormativity and heteronormativity. Two terms I'm going to focus on today are gendered erotic diversity and white settler. Gendered erotic diversity in this project is used instead of sexuality. I take from Cannon's 1998, The Regulation of First Nations Sexuality, where he writes, a broad range of gender and erotic relations existed among Aboriginal populations in early contact. Gendered erotic diversity is used to open up the spectrum and or continuum of erotic diversity in a realm that is not solely based on attraction or sexual desires. Following the reasons to why two-spirited was conjured in the first place, gendered erotic diversity pays attention to the many forms of erotic diversity that are stagnant within white settler queer culture. White settler, then, elicits undertones of colonialism that continue to permeate dominant understandings of Canadian culture. White settler also is used to signify a large biopolitical space where Canada, as it promotes itself, continues to forget, choosing or not, that this continent was taken from Aboriginal people who were here before continent. Before speaking directly to the politics of recognition that occurs within Pride Toronto, I want to speak to two-spirited as a gendered erotic diverse identity category that's adopted by both two-spirited people and Pride Toronto. Two-spirited cannot be easily defined as it contains within diverse meanings when two-spirited is read differently in divergent contexts and cultures.